Well, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really glad to see such big number of participants, and welcome to this special event, the practice of the I Ching. I'm James V. Barbieri, Associate Program Director here at the Pari Center, and I'll be your host for today. Today with me, we also have Eleanor Pete, the Program Director of the Pari Center, Maureen Doolan, who's the co-founder of the Pari Center, who will assist both me and you during this call. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone of a couple of Zoom rules for this session. First of all, during the presentation, we ask participants to turn off their microphone just to ensure better quality audio. For this reason, we may mute you if we hear any background noise, but don't worry, you will have the opportunity to speak later during Q&A. If you would like to ask a question or make a contribution later, please use the either raise your hand function on Zoom. Otherwise, you can physically raise your hand, and if I spot you, I'll call you out and you can turn on your microphone and ask your question. Otherwise, you can also use the chat section of the Zoom call. It will be open throughout the call, so please use it, as it's a great way to share your insights and thoughts about what's being discussed. And also, if you're a bit too shy to ask a question in person, you can use it in the chat section. We also invite participants to turn on their video camera, as we believe that seeing everyone's faces and reactions creates a nice educational environment. However, if you're not comfortable doing so, feel free to just keep the camera off. Finally, this session is recorded for archival purposes. The recording will be available on YouTube shortly after the call, maybe after a week. And on YouTube, you will also have the opportunity to see all the past free Pari Center events. So check out our channel. And that's it for rules. We can begin with the event. Today, we welcome the director of the Pari Center, Shantena Sabbadini, and it's great to have him with us today. Shantena has a wide range of interests in such a exciting life, and I'll try to introduce him as best as I can. So Shantena graduated from the University of Milan and was awarded his PhD at the University of California. His scientific interest ranged from the foundation of quantum mechanics to cosmology. He also contributed to the theoretical work behind the discovery of Cygnus X1, the first found black hole. He later became the scientific consultant at the Eranos Foundation in the 90s. And there he dedicated himself to the translation of the I Ching and the Untitled Chapter. He first met F. David Pete, the founder of the Pari Center, in 2002. And from there, their great relationship grew, and so did their partnership. After Pete's death in 2017, we were honored to have Shantena succeed him as director of the Pari Center. Today, Shantena will have his presentation, which will be about 45 minutes, and then we will concentrate mainly on the Q&A, where you have the possibility to ask Shantena more on the practice of the I Ching. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Shantena. Welcome.
Thank you very much, James. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely having such a lively interest in the I Ching. And the purpose of today's session is really your opening space up for your questions. I've called it the practice of the I Ching, and I want to stress that word practice in the sense that the many little doubts or questions or curiosity or incomplete understanding that has occasionally surfaced in working with the I Ching in other sessions. Well, this is the space for looking at that. So I'll give you an introduction, which to some of you is probably familiar already because I've given it in various contexts, Synchronicity, I Ching, and then opening up the space for your questions. So let me start by sharing my screen. And okay, right. Okay, that's my usual start in talks about the I Ching. I usually start from the name of the book. It's popularly called the Book of Changes, I Ching, and change is that I. Ching simply means a book or classic. So this is the classic of changes. Other meanings of Yi are easy, simple, versatile. So it's also a book of versatility. That's actually the title of the first version of the Eranos I Ching was called the Book of Versatility. In China, it's more widely known as the Zhao Yi, the Yi of the Zhao dynasty. Interestingly enough, Zhao means also universal, encompassing. So it's the book of versatility and the book of universal versatility. Okay. The change in the name, the Book of Changes, refers especially to unpredictable change. So the book arises as a book of divination, and it's for dealing with situations in which we're confronted with a challenge that, let's say, our ordinary rational tools are not fully equipped to handle. That's when traditionally people had recourse to divination. In ancient China, it was conceived as a dialogue with the gods and ancestors, a dialogue with the higher wisdoms of the invisible realm. So the I Ching is the book of unpredictable change, and we could conceive it as a map of order and chaos. It's dealing with confusion, and it's dealing with confusion in a very systematic way through those two basic categories of Chinese thought, which are yin and yang. So it's mapping unpredictable change in a systematic way through yin and yang. In that sense, the I Ching is also, we could also view it as a map of the dance of order and chaos, which is interesting because in our contemporary chaos theory, that's where life is located. It's really on the interface of order and chaos. And pure order is too static to be alive, and pure chaos is too dynamic to create stable forms. So the I Ching deals with that borderline, with that fine line between these two. The language of the I Ching is based on those two basic categories of yin and yang. Let's see if I can move on here. I don't seem to be able to move to the next slide.
Maybe try clicking on it.
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, yin and yang, and from their interplay, the Chinese say the 10,000 things or 10,000 beings. The Chinese has just one word for thing and being. Interestingly enough, there's not such a sharp distinction as we have in our Western mind. So yin and yang, let me give you like a short review of these two categories. They're polar opposites, and their interaction generates the whole of reality, according to the Chinese. Primarily, yin refers to the shady northern slope of a mountain, and yang to the broader, bright southern slope of a mountain. The polarities are yin is water, yang is fire, yin is moon, yang is sun. So dark, bright, moist, dry, soft, hard, and so on and so forth. Feminine, masculine. In a most general sense, you could relate yang to energy and yin to form. So pure energy without form doesn't create anything. Things get destroyed before they have sufficient form. But pure form without energy is also not alive. But the interaction, the interplay of these two forces creates life and all movement. So these two, well, let me go back one. First of all, these two energies are seen as constantly moving into each other. They're dynamic forces, dynamic energies. So that, let's say, when the light part, the yang part, reaches its peak, a dark spot is generated, which is the seed of yin. And then the yin will start growing until it reaches its culmination. And when it culminates, a white spot is generated there. So it's like noon is when the night starts coming in, and midnight is the beginning of dawn. The Chinese have very strongly this sense of circularity. Okay, these two basic energies, qualities, yin and yang, when we combine them three ways, forming a trigram, they have 8 possibilities. There's 8 possibilities of combining two different properties in sets of 3. And they have a symbol, a name, a symbol, an action, and they constitute a family in Chinese mind. So the pure yang energy, 3 yang line, is the father. The 3 yin line is the mother. With the solid line at the bottom, in China, the energy in trigrams and hexagrams enters from the bottom and rises. So the shake is yang energy entering, and that's the eldest son. Gorge is yang energy at the center, the middle son. And bound or mountain is the youngest son with the yang energy at the top. And the same for the position of the yin line, the open line, which is like the eldest daughter, the middle daughter, and the youngest daughter. So these 8 qualities, these 8 energy are for the Chinese let's say, the building bricks of the universe. And they have a quality. They're not just abstract concepts. They have specific energies. And they, in turn, constitute a circle. The Chinese thinks in terms of cycles, not so much of linear development as recurring cyclical energies. And in Chinese thinking, various cycles are mixed and superposed. And so this map, which we've called the universal compass, it summarizes the understanding of Chinese scholars of the Han Dynasty around 70 BC. A great meeting of Confucian scholars was called to organize cyclical understanding of reality. And in this cyclical understanding, in this picture, the top half is yang and the bottom half is yin. And you can think of it as animated by a clockwise movement, so that the yang at some point turns into yin, and the yin grows and then reaches its peak and turns into yang, and so on. But this is also related to the notion of five elements, or five transformative qualities: wood, fire, metal, and water. They also form a circle, and all that is on the same radius in these circles resonates together. So, for example, wood, which is the youngest yang, resonates with also the image of the thunder, which is the trigram shake. So when you're having a dialogue with the I Ching, all these various terms resonate with each other, activate each other, so to speak.
Shantena, you seem to be muted. Ah, there we go.
Okay. Screen sharing. Okay. The way we represent the way that I Ching works in our Western understanding is through this concept that Jung created of synchronicity. Jung says synchronicity takes the coincidence of events in space and time as meaning something more than mere chance. So it reads the events as having meaning, as everything contains a message. For the Chinese, every moment in time has a specific quality, so that all the aspects of what's happening at one time are in resonance. They think in terms of organic patterns. Okay, so synchronicity is the key to read I Ching. The consultation is done through a random process, which is either handling 50 yarrow stalks or throwing 3 coins. And to the Chinese, that the way the coins fall, the way the stalks are parted, reflects the quality of the moment, is a key to enter the moment and therefore understand the larger context. How to understand our situation and our question in terms of what the I Ching describes as the quality of the moment, a synchronistic happening. This topic of synchronicity was one of the main themes of this long correspondence that the physicist Wolfgang Paulie and C.G. Jung held between 1932 and 1958. They wrote these wonderful letters to each other, which are something amazing from our contemporary email culture. They write like 3 or 4 pages of intense, specific argument, and a few days later, the other one will come back with another one of the same level. Here we have a statement of Paulie, his way to describe, let's see, how can I, it's half covered. Well, it doesn't matter, I can summarize it. He says, for the invisible reality, which in both quantum physics and the psychology of the unconscious brings up, I'm convinced, Paulie says, that a unitary psychophysical language must be ultimately adequate. And that's what I would like to reach. I'm convinced that the final objective is the same, whether you come from the side of the psyche or from the side of matter. So Jung was coming in from the point of view of synchronicity, Paulie was coming in from the point of view of quantum physics, and says Paulie, therefore I consider the distinction between materialism and idealism as obsolete. In a way, there are 2 sides of one coin. It's like consciousness is experiencing reality from inside. Matter is reality as appears on the outside. The conversation, well, first a few words about Paulie, who's a really interesting character. Very smart since very young age. He gets the Nobel Prize in 1945 for Paulie's exclusion principle, which is essentially the fact that 2 fermions, like 2 electrons, cannot share the same quantum state, which is a basic fact in understanding the structure of atoms and therefore all of chemistry. So it's quite fundamental. It's quite a fundamental notion in the order of the universe. But the interesting, from our point of view, the interesting aspect of it is that it's not a force acting between 2 different things. it's kind of a type of order that constrains electrons to be on different levels. So it has somewhat the quality of synchronicity, of something which is not direct interaction, it's not a force, but the order of things requires it to be that way. Pali was also popularly known for his Paulie effect, which is the fact that people noticed that when Pali was around, laboratory equipment would break down. He seemed to have like a quality shaking things up, and it was also rather difficult to live with, and very stern with his colleagues. He was known for to make comments like, "This paper is not even wrong." It doesn't reach to the level of wrong. It's worse than that. And this Paulie effect, another little anecdote is that during a meeting of Jungian society in Zurich, suddenly a big Chinese vase broke down without anybody touching it, and somebody said, "Oh wow, this looks like Paulie effect, but how come Paulie is not here?" Well, they discovered later that at that moment, Paulie was on a train coming through Zurich. Exactly. Okay, so that's Wolfgang Paulie. There's many nice stories about him, but we'll leave him at that for now. Well, he had very interesting dreams, and he was in analysis with Marie-Louise von Franz. Jung didn't want to take him in analysis himself. He said not to introduce an intellectual bias in the interpretation of his dreams. Well, but back to synchronicity, like the discussion between Paulie and Jung on this specific theme. They discuss many things, but culminates in a number of letters they exchange in a couple of months between November 1950 and January 1951. In 1951, by the way, then Jung will give a talk about synchronicity at Eranos, and I'll tell you a bit about Eranos later. And it mainly concentrates around two questions. One is synchronicity a scientific phenomenon? Is it testable by statistical methods? And the other question is, does synchronicity have something to do with quantum physics? Now, to the first question, is synchronicity a scientific principle? Paulie says no. He's convinced that that's not the case. Well, first of all, where was the question coming from? Jung was very much interested in the experiments of J.B. Rhine in the US, on extrasensory perception, precognition, and so on. So Pauli's answer is that nature is so fashioned that, analogous to Bohr's complementarity in physics. In quantum physics, Bohr had introduced this notion that some measurable properties of a system are complementary in the sense that they can never be fully known both together. We can only see through one lens or another, like as particle or as wave and so on. So Pari is saying something like that is happening with synchronicity, in the sense that no contradiction between causality and synchronicity can ever be found. He says, what appears to me of fundamental importance is the requirement made of a law of nature in any experimental science that it should relate to reproducible processes. That's a key idea. He doesn't fully develop it any further than that. But so there's like two ways of looking at reality. One is in terms of reproducible processes. I make an experiment here today, and you can reproduce it next year in Tokyo, and we can have a dialogue about it. That's a key requirement for what we call experimental science, as like physics. So what is implying here is that that's not the case with synchronicity. Synchronicity is not reproducible at will. It's so to speak, like meaning expresses itself spontaneously, and usually catching us unaware. The other question that Paulie and Jung are debating in those letters is, does synchronicity have something in common with quantum observation? And Paulie answers that that aspect of uniqueness, which he sees as characteristic of synchronicity, in physics manifests in an unexpected place. And this place, he says, is the observation itself, which is unique, or an act of creation, if you will. I would like to underline that act of creation. It's like the single in quantum physics is a statistical science. It predicts in wonderful detail statistical phenomena. So like when we repeat an experiment in, let's say, identical circumstances many times, it can tell you which proportion will have a certain outcome and which will have another outcome and so on. But the single event is unpredictable, intrinsically unpredictable. Not just unpredictable for lack of information, as we're used to think of, and predictability. This is like, there's no further way of predicting it. That's what Paulie calls an act of creation. It's ordinarily just considered random. But Paulie uses a different term, an act of creation. It's the same thing in a way, but very different resonance. One is kind of assuming that it's meaningless when I say random. But when I say an act of creation, the notion of meaning is somehow evoked. Okay, well, let's go back to the I Ching. So we can think of the I Ching as a medium to access synchronicity, or a way to invite synchronicity. It's like it's like inviting a dream about a specific situation. Jung says the I Ching is a formidable psychological system that endeavors to organize the play of archetypes into a certain pattern so that a reading becomes possible. Okay, let me give you a short history of the I Ching. So where does it come from? What's the story of it? And first I'll tell you the story in terms of Chinese myth, Chinese legend, the legendary interpretation, understanding of the I Ching. The first figure connected with the I Ching is Fu Shi, or Bao Shi is another name of the same person, the first emperor. It's a mythical figure. Chinese chronology places it in somewhere like 3000 or 4000 BC, but it's an imaginary figure, a very important imaginary figure. And the Great Treatise, one of the commentaries to the I Ching, says, when in early antiquity Bao Shi ruled the world, he looked upward and contemplated the images in heaven. He looked downward and contemplated the forms of earth. And he invented the 8 trigrams in order to enter into communion with the divine light's virtue, and to classify the nature of the myriad beings. In one version of the story, the 8 trigrams are carved on the carapace of a turtle that comes out of the Yellow River. So the Fu Shi gets the 8 trigram revealed to him in that way. In this image, he's together with his consort, Nu-Wa, who's also his sister. He's his sister and consort. They both with half serpent body, very, very significant. Serpent is a Chthonian creature. It has the quality of the depth of the earth. And this intertwined serpents remind us of the Kundalini energy of Hindus, or also on Mercury's caduceus, this symbol of medicine nowadays. So they're rooted in this like deep underground, under the earth energy. And out of that emerges this human quality. It emerges with a sacred marriage, with a meeting of these two yin and yang energy, and generating culture, creating culture. They are the parents of humanity. And you can see they're holding like a square and a kind of scissors in their hands. So they bring in tools, they bring in culture. They are the beginning of technology. They're our ancestors there. So Fu Shi is the first person, first creator of the I Ching. And the second one which is considered the real founder of Ichi, is the founder of the Zhao dynasty, who takes over China from the Shang in the 11th century BC. And there's a legend about him. And the legend is that the last Shang emperor was jealous of the great reputation of wisdom and competence that King Wen had. So he locked him down in an underground cave. And he was prisoner in this cave for many years. And during this time, he meditated on the 8 trigrams of Fuxi and combined them in couples, in pairs, creating from 8 trigrams 64 hexagrams, and considered them as like basic combination, basic configurations of energy in the universe, and wrote short commentary, a short key to read these 64 types of energy. Another traditional author is the son of the Duke of Zhao, who wrote a commentary on his father's texts. And finally, all the more recent texts, the texts are traditionally attributed to Confucius, the master of 10,000 generations. In China, everything which is wise is associated with Confucius. Like someone recently made me notice the fact that we tend to attribute to Einstein all wise sayings of our time. For the Chinese was Confucius. The modern scholarship has a different story about the origin of the I Ching. And it relates to the shamans of the Shang dynasty, so 2nd millennium BC. The Shang shamans practiced the divination with fire by causing through fire an animal bone, or sometimes a turtle's shell, to spontaneously crack. And they would read those cracks as a message from the gods and the ancestors, and thus answer questions. Like a king would ask a question, what about such marriage, or what about making war to our neighbors? The shaman would do a ritual, offer a sacrifice, and read the cracks formed on these bones, and pronounce a statement which would offer an answer to the question that had been posed. Now, these shamanic statements eventually started being collected and transcribed and passed on from generation to generation. Museums of these cracked shells, cracked bones was formed, in which all these pieces were collected for future reference. Here's the turtle's shell, a carapace. Well, when these shamanic statements started being collected in encyclopedias of divination, a new method of consultation became possible. Wu Xian, a shaman whose name means the conjoining shaman, introduced this practice of counting yarrow stalks to refer to a certain figure, a certain combination of yin and yang, which would go back to these collections of traditional sentences and select a given sentence and apply that to the specific situation that the oracle was consulted about. So much easier than doing a whole ritual, a whole pyromantic ritual. And it became much available to a much larger class, especially the literati, the Chinese scholars who were like typically state officers. So during the Han Dynasty, which is like the real origin of the Chinese Empire, up to that point, China was fractioned in various kingdoms, warring with each other. Then the Qin created the notion of the empire. They didn't last long. They disappeared very quickly. But the Han that came later really founded the empire. A key aspect of founding the empire was the cultural unification of China. China was already at that time very much consisting of various peoples and various cultures, like nowadays still. So a key enterprise to founding the empire was the cultural unification of all these different people. And that was done through language, through the written language, even though the pronunciation may be very different in different provinces in China. The written language is the same, and just as important, by defining the classics, by defining those works that were the base of the training of the imperial officers. And the I Ching was declared to be the first of the classic. So the key of the training and understanding that a literatus was supposed to have. The ultimate organization of the I Ching material came in 1715 with the editions sponsored by the Emperor Kangxi, which came to be known as the Palace edition. That's a precious book of which there are very few exemplaries in the world. And Richard Wilhelm looked for it for many, many years before finally finding it. And my colleague and teacher, Rudolf Ritzman, with which, oh no, you cannot see that, with which we've done this book together, also had like the privilege of getting hold of one original of the Palace edition. Now, how did it come to us? The I Ching came to us first through the Jesuit missionaries who were going to China to convert the Chinese to Christianity, especially in the 16th and 17th century. And some of these missionaries got deeply interested in the Chinese culture. Here we see Matteo Ichi, an Italian missionary of the 16th century, in a very typically kind of split personality situation. He's wearing the Chinese literatus outfit, but he has his crucifix next to him. They had a very important impact and role in the knowledge and the exchange, initially exchange of these two cultures. Matteo Ichi brought to China Western astronomy, translated into Chinese Euclid's elements, and brought to the West fragments of Confucian philosophy and some texts of the I Ching. Now, still a missionary was the person who definitely brought the I Ching to the West, and that's Richard Wilhelm, nicknamed the Marco Polo of Chinese spirituality. So he's a Protestant missionary. He went to China in the end of the 19th century, the 1800s, and got deeply interested in Chinese culture and spirituality. In fact, later on of him, he would say about himself that he went to China to teach Chinese Western religion, and he came back teaching Westerners Chinese spirituality. So he met Lao Nai Chuan, a Neo-Confucian master, who was his guide into this cryptic text, which is the I Ching. And he embarked on a German translation of the I Ching. There are older translations like James Legge in the late 1800. But what's special about Richard's work is that the book was for him a spiritual guide. So he's deeply identified with it, not just anthropological curiosity. He was part of a circle in Darmstadt around, founded by Count Kaiserling, of which Jung also belonged to. And he brought his translation to the School of Wisdom of Kaiserling, met Jung there, who got very deeply interested in Richard Wilhelm's work with the I Ching. Jung wrote a preface to the Wilhelm translation. The Wilhelm translation was eventually translated into English in 1950 with a foreword by Jung, and that was definitely a turning point. That's the time when the I Ching became popular in the West. Now, Jung, before writing the foreword to the Willem translation, Jung interrogated the I Ching about it. It says, basically asks I Ching, tell me, what do you tell me about me doing an introduction, a preface to your translation in Western language? He got the hexagram 50 with two changing lines, second and third, going into hexagram 35. And hexagram 50 is ding, or in the Eranos version is called a vessel. Willem calls it a cauldron. And it's a container which was filled with the cooked food that was offered to gods and ancestors. So it's kind of an alchemical vessel in which like physical food is transformed into spiritual nourishment. He was deeply, he identified strongly with this answer, and especially with the message of the two changing lines. The 9 in the second place says, the vessel has substance, my companion has affliction, I'm not able to approach. Significant. Jung read it in a very nice and subtle way. It's like the I Ching, the cauldron itself is speaking here. And it says, I have a spiritual wealth I can offer. I have substance. But the people around me are not ready. My companion has affliction. In Willem's translation, it's like something like jealousy. We could read it like insufficient understanding. Therefore, still the I Ching speaking as a cauldron, therefore I'm not able to approach. This is significant. And the other line is the vessel's ears skinned. The ears of the vessel are the handles. The thing typically has 2 handles and 3 legs. The vessel's ears skinned, its movement impeded, the pheasant's juice not taken in. On all sides, rain lessens repenting, completing significant. So the handles, the ears or handles, is what's needed to hold on, to maneuver the thing. But they're broken. So its movement is impeded. And its rich food inside, we cannot absorb it. So how Jung read this answer is like, there's a profound wisdom, a wealth of profound wisdom available there, which the West is not yet ready to, lacks the handle to benefit from it. But at the end, the 9 at third says, on all sides rain lessens repenting. often in the I Ching and in Chinese thinking, rain is purifying, and it's like, of course, it's like what allows the earth to be fertile and to sprout. So bringing this to completion is significant. Olga Fröbe-Kaptein, she's another figure that was at those meetings in Darmstadt, the School of Wisdom of Count Kaiserling, and she connected there with Jung. In 1933, she founds Eranos as an east-west center on the Lago Maggiore, on the Swiss part of the Lago Maggiore, the top of Lago Maggiore. She gets from her father as a gift a house on the lake shore with a beautiful garden around it. The father was an engineer, and he had invented a type of brakes for trains, and had sold it to the Westinghouse. So he was quite wealthy. So gives his daughter Olga this house on the shore of Lago Maggiore, and she, at the beginning, she has not a clear idea what she wants to do with it. But then gradually the notion of an east-west center starts developing, a center for a dialogue between East and West. Jung is very supportive and will remain like a faithful speaker, contributor to the Eranos meetings for 20 years. And this energetic combination, the West was in the process of discovering the East, and also the charismatic presence of C.G. Jung, no doubt, influenced, make it so that Eranos in the following decades attracted a quite extraordinary team of speakers. I would say like a large portion of European intellectuals, mostly in the field of mythology, psychology, literature, but some also from the science. Well, biology. Adolf Portman was the president of the Eranos Foundation for many years, was a famous biologist. Erwin Schrödinger, physicist, spoke at Eranos. So anyway, Eranos was a rich combination of, and especially was a place where people could share with a type of freedom which was not normally there in academia. So people would bring in their work in progress. Jung used it very much to introduce, to elaborate at this initial stage some of his fundamental ideas. This is again Olga and Jung in the garden. The place is magnificent. I arrived at Eranos many years later, in 1991. Jung had died long before, Olga also. But some of the spirit was still there, some of the very convivial spirit. In some ways, I've found that Pari, some of the same like convivial caring, personal quality that was there at Eranos. Now, the other key character of my story is Rudolf Ritzman, the person who has translated the I Ching with me, or I've translated it with him, because he's been really my master as far as the I Ching is concerned. He met the I Ching in 1944. He was born in 1918, so it was like about 25. Through his analyst Alvina von Keller, who was a student of Jung, and the meeting with the I Ching was a coup de foudre. He was like mesmerized, he was enchanted, and immediately asked Alvina if he could have the book. She was a bit resistant at first, told him something like, you're too young, first you should live and then worry about this. But he was like quite persistent, and finally managed to borrow the book for a week. And during that week, he sat down at his typewriter and copied it. I've chosen this picture because of that memory. Not necessarily it's the same moment, but it reminds me of that story. So he started studying the I Ching. He started studying classical Chinese and started studying the I Ching in depth. Some years later, in 1948, Rudolf Ritzman and his wife Catherine went to spend some time in the winter at Ascona, where Eranos is, and they got into deep friendship with Olga Fröbe. Catherine Ritsema was a musician who was playing piano and harpsichord. Olga was very passionate about the I Ching, and so was Jung, deeply interested. So music, cemented the friendship between the Ritsemas and Olga and Eranos. Eventually, Rudolf started collaborating with Olga and with Portman, who was at the time also very close to Olga. And eventually, just before dying in 1961, Olga passed on the work of Eranos to the Ritsemas, to Rudolf and Catherine, and to Adolf Portman. But Adolf Portman was managing it from a distance. He was living in Basel. And Rudolf and Catherine was really running the center day to day and carrying it on. Okay, and eventually, well, at the beginning, Rudolf was working with I Ching. He had his Palace edition to compare with, but was working otherwise with Rudolf, with Richard Wilhelm's translation, and was writing commentaries on it, because what he realized by comparing it with the Chinese original is that Chinese is, especially ancient Chinese, archaic Chinese, like the Chinese of the I Ching, is an extremely fluid language in which words have many possible meanings. the context to some extent specifies it, but in the I Ching itself, even the content is not much help, because the structure of the text is like it's like islands of an archipelago rather than a structured unity. So it's basically a collection of evocative images. So Rudolf realized that there's many possible reading of the I Chings, and that even for the Chinese it was so, because they conceived the I Ching as answering questions. So its texts don't have an absolute meaning, which is always the same, but take a specific meaning in the context of a question. So at some point, Rudolf Ritzman started conceiving the project of a translation of the I Ching, which would give all that richness of possibilities to the Western reader. A Chinese reader sees in that character or that multiplicity of meanings. But as soon as we translate it with one specific word in a Western language, we miss all the rest. So we started conceiving this idea of an innovative translation, which would give the reader the possibility to access all that range of meanings. That's a description of let's say, the challenge or the problem that a translation of the I Ching poses. First of all, the fact that Chinese is an imaginal language. It has a minimal grammar in the sense that the same Chinese term can be a noun, an adjective, or a verb. And within each character, there's a whole play of archetypal motives. Here's an example. One of the trigrams and one of the hexagrams also of the I Ching is called in the Eranos translation open, dui. The main image is, well, the character associates the idea of mouth and vapor. So it's associated to the idea of communication and speak. But then by free association, it means a whole range of other things. So it's an open surface that promotes interaction and interpretation. It's people coming together, and therefore there's also a sense of festive gathering, but also a marketplace, like a place of exchange, barter, and so on, a place where people come together, but also by association, a place where water comes together. So the image is of a lake or a marsh. How do you transmit all that? Rudolph's idea was structured through like a few basic ideas. One basic idea is core words, to have for each Chinese character a specific translation word which would always be the same. For example, for this character, I will always call it open. I won't call it water, although it sometimes might resonate with that. But by using always the same term, I'm given a key to that collection of meanings that the Chinese contain. And instead of I choosing as translator which word to use, I will let you, reader, choose which words has a resonance to you in terms of your question, of your situation, of the energy that gets activated at the moment in your reading it. So core words as accompanied by fields of meaning. This list I have here of the meanings of the term open is the field of meaning of that character. So the book is structured as has a block of text, which is the oracular statement, and then fields of meaning. For each term which occurs in the oracular text, it gives you the whole range of meaning of the Chinese, or as close as possible to it, of the Chinese term. So it's kind of, this place is the work from the translator to the reader. Another characteristic of the Eranos I Ching is that there's a clear distinction between oracular and exegetic texts. The oracular texts are in this edition of the book are printed in red, and everything which is commentary is in black. That's a distinction which is not always clear in Wilhelm, and Rudolf considered it important that you have access to really what the ancient Chinese said there, not our interpretation of it. Okay, so out of the, let's say, the structure of the I Ching, come a few suggestions for how to interrogate the I Ching. The key point is probably ask a question which is emotionally significant for you. Because the answer is not in the book, the answer is in you. And your emotional involvement is what activates the energy of your interpretation. If the question is cold, if you're not deeply involved with it, probably the answer won't tell you much. There's even a typical answer in which the Ching tells you, don't bother me. But whether you get that one or another one, it will lack aliveness, will lack energy. So ask emotionally significant questions. And consider the fact that the answer will be in terms of images. All these texts of the I Ching are imaginal texts. So they don't say yes or no, or do this and not do that. In that way, like a formula which I often use, but you're invited to create your own, is I Ching, give me an image of this and this and this and this. So that's preferable as opposed yes/no questions, because I Ching never says yes/no. It can give you an image which is very attractive and another one which is very repulsive, but it's still completely up to you what you do with it. Also, for clarity, avoid alternatives. Avoid asking about two alternatives together in the same question, because then it would be difficult when you receive an image as an answer to know to which side of the alternative you should refer that image. Finally, the Chinese suggestion for reading the answer is rolling the words in your heart. In modern psychological language, we could translate it into free associate on what gets emotionally awakened in you. Rolling the words in your heart. Heart in Chinese is also mind. Mind and heart, there's no distinction. Okay, this is in the last year of the 1900s and first of the 2000. That's the way Eranos roundtable sessions were running. We still had people giving lectures like in the old times, but that would only occupy half of the day. And the other half is like people would work on their own questions to the I Ching. This the idea was that it's always the person who asks the question who's the ultimate interpreter of the answer. But the collective of people sitting around the table created like a kind of an alchemical situation or of a resonant body that often allowed the person asking the question to access deeper level of their understanding. Okay, I think that's enough for. Yeah, definitely that's enough. I've spoken for an hour and a half. Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you so much for that presentation. You've covered so much content of the I Ching, and I think it's been really great. I hope everyone's enjoyed that.
Thank you, James.
I guess we can move on to the Q&A.
Definitely, yes. That's our main interest, yes.
Okay, great. Well, this is more an opportunity for you, the audience, even the non-experienced people, people who have not really practiced the I Ching a lot but want to know more. We can use this platform to basically ask Shantena directly questions about it. So yes, to ask a question, you can either use the raise your hand function on Zoom or physically raise your hand. And if I spot you, you can ask your question.
Thank you.
So we have the first question from Puya. Is that how you pronounce it?
It's Puja.
Puja, sorry.
That's good. That's fine.
Are you from India, Puja?
I am from India, yes, but I live in Canada now.
Okay. I've lived in India.
So you know what puja means. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. That really gave a great history because I have been delving into the I Ching a lot since I practice feng shui, and it's all very connected. So of course, it's of extra interest. But I was just wondering, because there's this whole thing about the casting.
Yeah.
And there are so many different methods. And in the modern ways, people are literally saying, oh, look at the hours on the clock, and that's a good enough cast. What are your thoughts on that? And I don't know if you've seen the modern I Ching books. Now I'll hide the author's name just because I don't want to, but there's something like this, which actually just gives you, you see the time on your clock and you have a I Ching, a hexagram.
Okay.
But so just your thoughts on that, really.
Yeah. Well, I would say almost, but not quite, in the sense like from the point of view of synchronicity, you can really read anything as synchronicity. A friend of mine consults the I Ching just by opening the book at a random page and reading what it says there. That's not wrong, but actually the richer is the system that you use to approach synchronicity, the richer will be your experience of synchronicity. So reading the position of the handles of the hands on a clock might be a perfectly okay way, but it's still a relatively crude reading of the situation. The I Ching is a more complex, evolved tool for reading the quality of the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja.
Thank you, Pooja, for that question. We'll take the next one from Hillary.
Hillary?
Hello. Thank you ever so much for the talk, for letting us all in. Really appreciate it. I kind of owe my start in the I Ching to the Eranos edition. And you mentioned that Ritsema wrote commentaries on the Wilhelm Beindel and Wilhelm, and that there are early writings of his. Are these available anywhere? Do you know?
Yes, they are. Not maybe easily accessible because they are on. No, wait. They are on Spring Journal. And all the issues of Spring. Spring is the main, I would say, journal of Jungian of the Jungian societies in the US. You can Google Spring Journal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I shall.
Yeah, and those are really old issues. I don't know how easy it is to get hold of them, but yeah.
I'll go and have a look. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hillary, for that. Next question, we can move to Lena. Hello, Lena.
Hi. I was just wondering, I often, I noticed that very often the yin is more like pejorative than the yang. It always seems like it's kind of negative. And I was wondering,
Well, yeah,
how you interpret it.
You're putting the finger on a sore spot, I think, of Wilhelm's translation.
Mm-hmm.
But probably not because of Wilhelm himself, but it was part of it was definitely part of the Chinese culture, giving a higher evaluation to the male aspect of things, and not if you go deep enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like think of that image of Fuxi Nuwa, the first emperor and his consort, and deeply intertwined and perfectly symmetric. So I think if you dive, if you dig deep enough, you get to a layer where like that male-female yin-yang balance is really there. But in most of Chinese culture as it developed out of it, it has a prejudice favoring yang against yin. We've tried in the Eranos version to avoid that bias. And we consider actually, if you think of yin and yang, like in those really basic terms of energy and form, they're very different, but there's no hierarchy there.
Okay.
And it's only the conjunction of the two that, so even calling yang the creative and yin the receptive, it doesn't do full justice to it. Because it's really the conjunction of the two.
Of the two.
As we know also in our biology.
Right. I was thinking sometimes that it was more, some reason, like more, the yin would be more like our terrestrial, very like more, I don't know, animal side, and the yang was more like the divine sign. But one doesn't go without the other, because what would be the divine if it couldn't manifest in the, you know, like the terrestrial, whatever. Anyway, but I see what you mean, and I that's it. We have to be in a mindset, I think, that in that complementarity, in the, you know, compared to the yin being negative and the yang being positive.
You could also say that there's a complementarity between earth and heaven.
Because I'm sorry, between what?
The earth and heaven.
Yeah. That's what I meant.
But it's not that heaven is superior. It's
Yeah. I hear you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lena, for that. And the next question can come from a familiar face from Early Pari Center, Arnold. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, guys.
Where are you, Arnold? Hi, Arnold. Lovely seeing you.
I know, lovely seeing you. I was just recalling that I met you at Eranos in 2003, which is a wonderful place to meet. Anyway, so my question for today, and by the way, I'm going to email you afterwards with some more interesting stuff. But my question for the moment is, how do you compare different systems of divination, or how do you choose a system? I mean, if you take the I Ching compared to the tarot, compared to, I don't know, active imagination with a spirit guide, or things like that. Obviously, there's some difference, but let's say you're familiar with several different divination systems and you have a burning question. Do you always go to the same one, or how do you relate the different systems, or is there any relation?
No, I think there is. I think to some extent it's a matter of chance what system you get more connected with. I've used the tarot quite extensively at one point in my life. Then I met Rudolf, and he definitely got me passionate about the I Ching, and I tended to then keep asking the I Ching rather than the tarot.
I suppose one becomes more and more familiar with any particular system, but there may also be, you know, as you've been kind of implying, a cultural component to the whole thing as well.
Certainly, but I think that the aspect of chance is interesting and remarkable, because it's kind of also a form of synchronicity manifesting. Like in a session we had a few days ago using tarot cards, Matthew Martins had us picking one card without seeing it from a covered deck of cards and deck of tarot cards, and the one that came up spoke to me in a very interesting way. So the chance of happening to be a participant in that session moved me in that direction. But I
So-
think I like to look at the idea of synchronicity as fundamental and
Yeah.
what system as secondary.
Sure. No, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnold. And Shantena, if you don't mind me asking, which card did you pick from the tarot deck?
I picked the card Temperance,
Temperance.
which I think I never had before. So it was quite interesting. Maybe I'm entering a new phase in my life.
Yeah, great. Well, just to move on to the next question, we have Mike with his hand up.
Hello, Mike.
Oh, well, you're still muted, Mike.
Yeah, I'm muted. Oh well.
Hello, Mike.
Now I'm not in. My condolences to everyone. What I just wanted to acknowledge Arnold, who said hello and hi back, and I'll call you later. Okay. But what intrigued me was the very beginning, which is actually at the beginning, was Paulie's description of an observation as an act of creation. And I'm thinking, do you associate that with the collapse of the wave function? Schrodinger's collapse of the wave function, because I'm reading something from Alan Wallace lately, and he describes that moment where the observation is made in relation to the original phenomenon that is observed, saying that the original phenomenon disappears and is replaced by something else. And my reading of that is that something else is human experience.
Mhm.
If we look at it from that point of view. And also, I'm not sure how this, I don't think there can be science at that point. That's a kind of independent act, and it's faithful for all of us, but I don't see how there can be science at that point.
Yeah.
In terms of understanding what the original phenomenon is what I mean. And I think we're caught in, sorry?
But let me try to comment on that.
Yeah, okay.
It's a very interesting question, and I see you're going on in another interesting question again.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And it's not depending on the collapse of the wave function. I personally don't believe in the collapse of the wave function. I'm of the decoherence school. So that there's on one hand, a perfect determinism in the evolution of the quantum state of the system, governed by Schrödinger equation or generalization thereof. But still, that only gives you the statistics of any potential observation. It doesn't tell you anything about what will happen in one specific observation. So what happens in one specific observation is an event in consciousness.
Yes.
So in that sense, I think Alan Wallace is correct. And it doesn't depend on, it's not that the observer causes the collapse of the wave function, and I don't believe that there is any collapse of the wave function, in fact. But still,
yeah. What does that leave you with?
Sorry?
What does that leave you with the original phenomenon, or are you still in a Kantian world?
No. I think consciousness is primary.
Okay.
So it's an event in consciousness is not necessarily the consciousness of the personal consciousness of
Right.
consciousness.
Okay, I'm just going to share with you right now. I have another question about Paulie and Jung, but I want to. This brings to mind a conversation I had with a Buddhist teacher of mine, and I said to him, if we were having coffee with a cosmologist or an astrophysicist, would you tell him that our whole experience of the universe is generated out of the deep base of mind? And his answer was yes, but not right away. You're frozen.
He is, yes. Okay, he's back.
You're frozen. I don't know if I'm frozen or you're
froze
frozen.
for us, yes, but it's okay. You're back.
Hello?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. My internet connection is unstable.
Okay. Oh, that's synchronous.
Paulie effect. Yeah. So, sorry, Mike. Did you have that second question, or?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the Paulie Jung,
Yeah.
Particular thing from Jung's side and also from Paulie's side, there is the importance of Eros.
Yeah.
And that's very important in the alchemy of their whole universe, I think, in a certain respect. How then did you relate that to the yin yang thing? And in some way, can what they understood as Eros be a way of connecting East and West here in the original Eranos meaning?
Well, I think that image of Fuxia Nuwa that I showed you is a nice representation of that fundamental energy.
Yeah.
And
maybe Dante.
Yes.
in the last lines of the Paradiso, this is the love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those are my questions, and thank you, Shantena.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for that. Okay. Let's take the next question from Harman.
Hello, Shantena. Thank you for your interesting talk. When you look on internet for the Eranos I Ching, you will find several versions of that book. The first version, which was published by Ritsema and Stephen Karcher, and Stephen Karcher published his own version. And now you also have your version that you wrote with Ritsema. What are the differences between these versions? Are there any differences? And what was specifically your role in the last version?
Yes. I think my role and what I consider to be the most significant difference, it's actually quite subtle. It's like the old versions had, in my opinion, still quite prominent the sense of telling you what to do. It was the saying, like, if you get this hexagram, you are told to da 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 da. In the newer version, the ones that I've been involved in, that's not there. I don't conceive the I Ching as something that's telling you what to do. I think the I Ching only gives you images. And based on those images, you can choose what you do, what you want to do. And you're perfectly free also to go against it. It gives you a terrible image, but you feel that you need to go there. That's fine. Go there. have the experience. And I think that's the main thing. There are little technical things, and there's many technical glitches that could still be fixed, and but that's not so important. I think the spirit, that sense of directiveness or non-directiveness is the main difference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Harman. Our next question comes from Ali.
Ali?
Hello. Sorry to have arrived a little late. I was out for a walk, so I bring a little bit of the energy of early spring here in the Northeast US.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so this isn't really a thought. It's, I think, more of a feeling. And what I'm noticing is that this historical pulling through the elements and through time, and the use of water as one of those basic symbols next to the mountain in one of the images that you presented. And then the story of Paulie and what happened is with the things falling off and things getting disrupted, et cetera, et cetera. And so my question relates to, what is the continuous nature of consciousness, and how does this particular way of putting into some kind of order for us humans, why is this important now?
Wow, what a question. In June, we will have a course entitled, What is Question? What is Consciousness? What is consciousness? Seems pretty close to your question.
June, the next solstice time.
Yes.
Just to do a bit of advertising, what is consciousness is a question we'll be asking in June, or have a special program with that title.
So for now.
Glad I sensed into the root here, so I just give it a little water.
Will there be snacks in June too?
We can hope so. We can hope so. Sorry, Shantena, did you want to move on, or should we move on to the next question?
Let's move on to the next question, yeah.
Okay, so the next one comes from Rem.
Hello.
Hello, Rem.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. Greetings from the Philippines. I'd like to ask about the, Shantena, thank you. Thank you for your lecture. I'm refreshed learning about the history of the Eranos. I got one of the journals I just bought somewhere very, very cheap, but I was very lucky to get it. But anyway, my question is, I remember you mentioned, and I also read this in the book. You were talking about the importance of the rolling the words in your heart.
Yes.
And in my experience reading the I Ching, I'm doing it actually, but I'd like to. I'm wondering right now, how in your personal experience does that happen to you, or maybe you got some insights from how Ritsema did it when he was doing his readings. So I'd like to hear some personal insights or experience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, basically, I just hold those images in my attention, or in the back, not in my conscious attention all the time necessarily, but in the background, if you want. giving them time, allowing them to speak whenever they want to, rather than, let's say, actively try to squeeze a meaning out of it. It's kind of a more receptive way.
Yeah. So, if I may ask, does it take time, or does it happen very quickly whenever you meditate on the word? Yeah.
Can be either way. Sometimes it's clear, it's like evident and immediate.
Yeah.
And other times I can look back on it maybe a week later or a month later and say, hey, look, it was telling me that.
Yes. So the whole experience is, I'd say, very intuitive, right?
Yeah. I think a key element is like trust in your intuition.
Yeah.
Our problem is that we don't trust. We tend not to trust.
Yeah.
We intuit something, but
if I may share, I remember I read this somewhere in another book that there's this experience that the diviners call in ancient times, they call it the shamanic, or the light of gods. Like when they get the insight, it's like it's flashes of light instead of just an epiphany or a eureka light bulb moment. I always experience this, and I always tell this to my friends and clients. And the amazing thing is that it's like it really connects everything. And then I always describe it's like instead of one light bulb, it's like Christmas lights, you know. So anyway.
Yeah, very nice. In fact, I think that in that text about Fuxi that I read you, there's at some point the light of the gods, or I think it's Shen Min. That's the term there.
Yeah. Thank you, Shantena. It's good to meet you. And I've got the book, so I'm happy to really meet you in person. And thank you for your work.
Thank you, for that, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay.
Let's take. Are you happy to take maybe 2 more questions, Shantena?
Sure.
Okay, great. So we'll take the first one from Alan, and then we'll go to Annette.
Shantena, thank you.
Hello, Alan.
This is a very general question, but I was just wondering if all your work on ancient Chinese and the I Ching has given you any insights about what ancient China was like. Any insights about the people? And I'm really thinking about, I've had 2 trips to Egypt, and I'm very aware that when one sees documentaries about Egypt on television, ancient Egypt, often what's portrayed is a primitive, suspicious people believing in things that aren't true. But when you see what they created, the incredible structures, the civilization, I'm left feeling that I believe they had capabilities, maybe mental capabilities, ways of seeing the world that we've just lost. And I'm just wondering if all your work on ancient Chinese civilization has given you any insights.
Well, for one side, there's not so much difference between them and us. They were messing things up in just as effectively as we do, with their own system and their own tools. But yet there is some basic choices or like subtle subtle nuances of spirit in which, like, the East of China has followed one way and we followed another. And probably the main difference is this kind of organic understanding of happenings and reality, of everything as resonance. While we've chosen verifiable facts as the bricks that reality is made of.
So we should be more attentive in our lives, maybe, to learn from that.
Yeah, definitely. I think they're feeding on our approach to an extreme extent. It would be probably better if they did a little bit less of that, and we did a little bit more of feeding on their approach.
Thank you.
Nope.
Thank you so much for that, Alan. And we'll take the last question just because we've just gone over from Annette.
Sure. So thanks. Great. I'm just curious about a couple of things, and I realize we don't have a lot of time, so I'll throw out a couple and you can answer whichever of those would be most appealing to the larger group. So my questions are about when we're reading or interpreting our hexagrams. So when we were in session together, some of us, some people had moving lines, others had no moving lines. So could you say a little bit about moving lines or no moving lines? And then also maybe a little bit more about the counter hexagram, because I was sort of wondering, should we be looking at that to try to challenge ourselves to see the opposite of what we have? Or I wasn't exactly sure how to interpret that.
Yeah.
And something about the preceding hexagram. So there's a few more that I wrote in the chat, but if any of those things, it just might be helpful for those of us that are newer to this to have a little bit more understanding.
Good, very good questions. Technical questions, good, yeah. First of all, moving lines. Moving lines are kind of nuancing the core message of your hexagram. So the image of the situation, as it's called in the Eranos version, or the sentence, as Wilhelm calls it, that's the core message. So you should hold on to that when you read all the rest. But the lines can modify it. Sometimes in insignificant ways. If you don't have any moving lines, then the core message of your hexagram is the message. There's no need to further elaborate it. But if you do get changing lines, they influence to some extent your reading of the main hexagram, to some extent, because it never erases it, doesn't completely change it. But it does.
I have to laugh. You've gone into the dark. It almost feels like you're telling us the shadow of the hexagram. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just was like, where did he go?
Okay.
We only see your glasses, the reflection of the screen in your glasses.
We actually had quite an amazing transition. We started with sun right in your face, and now completely in the dark.
Please, we can hear you, and I'm sorry I interrupted what was beautiful, but it was just so funny.
I do have lights somewhere.
It's okay.
It's okay,
It's really funny. It works. We can still listen.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So your one question was the moving lines. Another question was the counter hexagram.
Right.
That's trouble.
Okay.
There's one thing which is interpreted in very different ways by different commentators. So there is not a unique tradition of how to make sense of that. The one way is as counter hexagram. That's my friend Rudolf's idea. And I stay with it for fidelity to the master, even though I'm not completely convinced by it. Some people interpret it not as counter, but as the hidden essence of the hexagram.
That's why I was laughing that you went into the dark.
I'm not convinced about that one either.
Okay.
But so that's one thing in which there is no consensus. Then your other question was the preceding situation. In a way that's very simple, because it's just physically the hexagram that comes before. But the Chinese see kind of a subtle cause and effect thread running through it. As far as Chinese can conceive of cause and effect, which is not very much. So it's just, there's some element in the previous hexagram that tells you you're coming from there. Sometimes that can be enlightening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to have some good technical questions.
Great, thank you so much, Annette. Now we have gone a bit over, so unfortunately, I guess we should close this session. Shantena, did you have any final remarks to make to the group before we all leave?
Well, just thank you very much for very interesting and stimulating questions. I have a sense we could go on talking about it for another 2 hours or something like that, but it's good to rest now.
Great, thank you so much, Shantena, for all the work you've put in towards this presentation, and thank you everyone to have contributed to the discussion. It's been a fantastic session. Now, as I said, I know it's late, but if you could just stay with me for a few more minutes, because I'd just like to give a few announcements before we all go. So the first one is that I'd just like to invite you to our next program, which is an immersive 2-day course entitled The Great Rethink with Colin Tudge. And this event will be run in collaboration with the Scientific and Medical Network. So Colin, inspired by his latest book, will explore in 4 different parts the different ways that the world can change and maybe should change, ranging from ecology, economics, sociology, and politics, ways to change the world in a sustainable way. At each part, we will have a special guest that will dialogue with Colin, such as Andrew Fellows, Denise Walton, Ian Rappel, and Ruby Reed. As I said, this event will be in 4 parts divided in 2 days. And these days will be the 17th and 24th of April. And secondly, I'd just like to invite you to our next session of our series, Flickering Reality, Exploring Ideas in Film and Television. For our next next session, we have the honor of having Kevin Liu, a senior lecturer and director of the MA Jungian and Post-Jungian Studies at the University of Essex, who will give his presentation entitled Persona, Masks That Conceal, Masks That Reveal. So, so Kevin will, by looking at films such as Wall Street, The Mask, and The Farewell, will analyze these by highlighting the potentially pathological relationship one can have with one's persona, and study the important role by this archetypal imperative in personality development. This is another one of our free events, and it will run on the 2nd of May, so I hope to see you all then. And finally, I'd just like to invite you all to support the Pari Center by becoming a friend of the Pari Center, which is our membership subscription. By becoming a friend, you will receive a 10% discount on all of our events, a free subscription to our quarterly journal, the Pari Perspectives, and access to our Friends of the Pari Center Circle on our online forum, Sutra. And to become a friend, you can visit our website for more information. And finally, as always, to contact us, you can either visit our website, we have a contact us section, or visit our Facebook or YouTube page, or you can just directly send us an email at james@paricenter.com to contact me, or eleanor.paricenter.com to contact Eleanor. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you again soon here at the Pari Center. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Shantena.
Thank you, James.
Bye-bye. Thank you.